I've been reading the book of 1 Samuel for the past few days. I would like to share some of my thoughts with you. Now let's look into the life of David. David was the youngest son of Jesse. Normally, the younger ones are a little more pampered than the elder ones, but this was not the case for David. When Saul, the first king of Israel, went against God, God told Samuel to anoint another king in his place. So Samuel went to the house of Jesse. Jesse brought forth all his kids except for David. Only when Samuel asked if he had any other kids, Jesse finally told about David. Even his father didn't consider him to be fit enough for a king. He was just a shepherd in everyone's eyes, but he was very good in what he did. When Goliath challenged the Israelites, no one was brave enough to stand against him. Only David, the little young boy, was strong enough to face him, and he killed him with just one pebble. When Saul saw the courage and faith in God that David had, he was very impressed. He set him over all his men of war. We can read in 1 Samuel 18 verses 5. So David went out wherever Saul sent him and behaved wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So people finally started noticing him. A person who was once a nobody started to become somebody. But when Saul saw this, he started becoming jealous. Now Saul already had all the attention that he required, but that was not enough for him. He wanted more. So what he decided to do? He decided to kill David. So we can read in 1 Samuel 18 verses 10 to 11. And it happened on the next day that the distressing spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house. So David played music with his hand, as at other times, but there was a spear in Saul's hand. And Saul cast the spear, for he said, I will pin David to the wall. But David escaped his presence twice. Now when Saul started throwing these spears on him, or when David got an idea that Saul was trying to kill him, he could have retaliated. He could have told him that he was in line to be king, and not him or any of his sons. But he didn't do any of that. Instead, he held his peace. Now Saul tried to kill David numerous amount of times, and David got plenty of opportunities to kill Saul, but he didn't use them. For example, we can read in 1 Samuel chapter 24 that both Saul and David were in one cave. Saul had no idea about it, but David knew. David was so close to Saul that he could cut off the corner of Saul's robe. Saul still didn't find out about it. Later, in 1 Samuel chapter 24:10, David calls out to Saul and tells him, Look, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord has delivered you today into my hand in the cave, and someone urged me to kill you. But my eyes spared you, and I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Similar incident happens in 1 Samuel chapter 26 in the wilderness of Ziph, when Saul and David happened to be in the same place together. David had a perfect opportunity to kill Saul. Saul nor his bodyguards had any idea about David lurking around them. Later, in 1 Samuel chapter 26 verses 7 to 8, we can read, So David and Abishai came to the people by night, and there Saul lay sleeping within the camp, with his spear stuck in the ground by his head, and Abner and the people lay all around him. Then Abishai said to David, God has delivered your enemy into your hand this day. Now therefore, please let me strike him at once with the spear, right to the earth, and I will not have to strike him a second time. People around David told him to kill Saul, but David did not lift up a single finger against the Lord's anointed. That's how much respect David had for Saul. And finally, during the war, Saul fell on his own spear and he died. We can read in 1 Samuel chapter 31 verses 4. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell on it. And so Saul brought about his own death. The spear he used to throw at David, He fell on that very spear and he died. If someone hurts you, do not hurt them. Bless those who persecute you. God sees your hurting heart, and in the right time, He will judge them and give them the due punishment. It is not up to us to judge people or to treat them the way they deserve. Treat everyone in the way that you want to be treated. Do not take revenge. And like David, wait, and in the due time, God will lift you up. You don't have to go and make your problem go away. God will clear out a path for you. David knew that he would be king. He could have told Saul, but he didn't. He didn't mock him with it. He treated him with respect. So when the times get rough, God will protect you. And when people rise up against you, God will deal with them. We just have to lean on God and wait for His time. We can read in Romans chapter 12, verses 19 to 21. Beloved, do not avenge yourself, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good.